Hello to everyone who's joined us today. Super excited to dive into this because, uh, for those who don't know me, I'm Nick O'Leary. I'm the co-creator of Node-RED and co-founder CTO here at FlowFuse. And, you know, over the last 10 plus years of working on Node-RED, one of the really exciting things, one of the things I always enjoy is the conversations with the real users and seeing how people have used Node-RED to solve real problems in the real world. And it's those stories that really just energize me and keep me excited about what we're doing with both Node-RED and what we're enabling at FlowFuse. So I'm particularly excited today that we have Kurt joining with us. Kurt and Wago have been long-time participants in the Node-RED community. Kurt was just telling me, the first video he did on using Node-RED with Wago dates back to 2016. So that's 8 years of work with Node-RED and in the Wago ecosystem. So super excited that Kurt's here to join with us. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Kurt and let him share his side of things.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of Node-RED. It's really an enabling technology, and I think it works really well with Wago's I/O products. We'll cover a little bit about the products that Wago has that support Node-RED, but we found that it's really enabled us to do things that were really difficult to do before in a standard PLC environment. So today we're going to kind of dive into using Node-RED in industrial applications and really looking at how we can use Node-RED exclusively, potentially without a runtime, without a PLC runtime. And so thought we'd start by just looking at real high-level view of what the product offering looks like for Wago. This is our main I/O system. It's the 750 series, and something that Wago pioneered back in the late 1990s. So we've been doing this for a long time, a lot of experience in this area. And essentially, you have 3 sections. You have your head unit, which is either a PLC or a coupler. So we have an array of couplers that can talk to different manufacturers. We have Modbus couplers, for example, which is what we'll be looking at today. But we also support like Ethernet IP and the Siemens protocols as well. So essentially, you bring in your power, and then it's a tongue and groove system. So there's no rack that you have to be concerned with, and the modules just kind of slide in next to each other. And you can think of it like a smart terminal block. So you can really reduce panel layout because you can terminate field wiring right on the I/O system, which is kind of unique, something that Wago pioneered. And then you have an end module at the end there. So because the system is very modular, we're able to keep it modern. You go to the next slide, please, Nick. So we have the kind of a low end and middle end and a high end in this series, depending on the application requirements. The PFC 100, is a single core ARM processor, and all these devices run in embedded Linux. And we were one of the first manufacturers to support Docker. So, the Node-RED can be run as a Docker container, as FlowFuse can also be instantiated as a codesys or a Node-RED instance on Docker as well. So yeah, we have the PFC 200 line, and then coming out next year is our PFC 300 line, which is a dual core, very high performance device. And then if you don't need a lot of I/O, maybe you just have a couple I/O points, then we have the compact series, which has a smaller number of onboard I/O. It's kind of a brick type device. And then on the next slide, you can see here we have a lot of I/O modules that are supported with the 750 series. There's actually over 500 different types of modules, if you can believe that. So all your standard digital input and output and analog input and output. But we also have a lot of specialty modules to interface with, 3-phase power measurement or load cells. We have stepper control, have a functional safety module, which is kind of like a safety relay kind of built into the I/O module. So just a lot of options there. Really, the goal is to try to just clean up the whole panel and put everything all in one rack. And then on the next slide, you can see we also have a whole line of industrial computers and industrial controllers. These would be used typically in conjunction with remote I/O. So you can use a 750 series with like a Modbus coupler, for example, and run your Node-RED on like an industrial computer. And that just gives you a lot more options, more flexibility, to have a full Linux operating system to work with if you need to install, databases, or you need a large memory footprint. These devices are better suited for that. And then we have the edge controller, which is kind of a cross between an edge computer and a PFC. It's available like with or without the screen. So if you want to mount something right on your panel door, you can go with like a TP600, which can host your Node-RED instance, as well as all the Linux containers you might be running in conjunction with that. So that's kind of the high level look at the hardware platforms. When we look at how we typically integrate Node-RED or FlowFuse into an industrial application, we're very much, we have just a lot of experience with the Code Assist, which is our IEC 61131 runtime. That's a kind of a soft PLC essentially, and it's a real-time platform, so it's very deterministic. It's wide adoption in the control world, and so what we've done is by using Docker and by using Node-RED running in a container, we can then pass data back and forth between that runtime and Node-RED using lots of different means, either a broker with MQTT, or network variables, or OPC-UA. There's lots of different ways there, but the idea is basically to combine the best of both worlds. Excuse me. And this works great, and we've been doing this for years. We have a lot of experience, and it's successful. But I always had this wondering, how can we maybe streamline this, and is there a possibility of doing the actual control of the machine in Node-RED? And when we first started proposing Node-RED, there was a lot of skepticism. Nicholas, you mentioned, we started really talking about Node-RED, 8 years ago. This was pre 1.0 release, and it was perfectly stable back then, but it's just only improved over time. And it's pretty rare now that you go into a company and they haven't heard of Node-RED, where in those early days there was a lot of skepticism, and rightfully so, with any new platform. But it's just been the rapid adoption and it's just proven itself to be very stable and adaptive for lots of different situations. So I think the interest in trying to run everything in Node-RED, I think, is kind of interesting to me anyway. So. So an opportunity came along to actually do this. We maybe if you go to the next slide, Nick, can show you.
Yeah.
If you think about how a PLC operates, you have your physical inputs and outputs. And those are usually handled, in your PLC runtime. Then you have all your programs that are running in a task or various tasks. You have global variables that are available to all those programs. You might have communications to different external devices that you need to manage, and then you might have a HMI component, for the actual operator interface. So if you kind of keep this, these concepts in your head when you're looking at adopting this in Node-RED, it helps to try to mimic more or less these functions in your Node-RED instance.
And one thought there, Kurt, is, and I think that's been one of the really interesting things of when you look at systems like Code Assist and the other sort of PLC control systems. Clearly, Node-RED is in some ways a different way of thinking and a different way of operating, but there's a lot of parallels with how you think about the problems and how you structure and you want to logically think about the architecture of how you solve those problems. And I think, as you say with Node-RED, one of the strengths we've had with it is just that the low-code nature of it, the visual nature of it, it does mean you can relate this sort of mental model with visually with how you structure your flows as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm from the world of PLC controls, and so this makes sense to me to try to organize the flows this way. But that might not make sense for someone who doesn't come from that space. I'm presenting my opinion on how I think this is one way to implement it, but certainly Node-RED is a blank canvas, and you can really design it any way you want. My goals of designing this was wanted it to be easy to troubleshoot. I think debugging is really critical when you're working with actual hardware and equipment. And then I wanted it to be easily understood by the next person that came along that you have to support this. So
absolutely, and I think there's some interesting topics there around debugging and techniques for approaching how you build your solutions in Node-RED, which again, I think some of your experience, and I know we'll come to some of your sort of reflections, shall we say, on what it takes to do this in Node-RED. But yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, and I should mention this was like 3 years ago when we first undertook this project, and it was kind of a proof of concept. We didn't know how it would turn out. We always had the ability to go back to that hybrid approach that we talked about earlier. Ultimately, that was not necessary. We were able to successfully, complete this, and we've done several other projects since then. So where it makes sense, and we'll get into some of those things to keep in mind when we're considering this. So,
cool.
So yeah, if we look at the next slide, we can just summarize some of the tips going into this. I found it was really helpful to organize Node-RED like that block diagram we just looked at. And then really using global context as much as possible, and using JavaScript functions wherever possible. It's really easy to, with these larger applications, to create very large flows with lots of interconnections. And I think sometimes that can be tricky to troubleshoot. And it's a little overwhelming, I think, when you're looking at it and when it's actually running. So by using the global context and JavaScript functions, I think you can compartmentalize things a little cleaner, and at least for me, it was easier to troubleshoot.
It's an interesting point about. I know there are certainly advocates in the community who say the function node is the node of last resort, and to try and be a bit more purist in the having it all in the nodes. But I definitely see there's that balance to get between breaking everything up into lots of nodes without resorting to the function node, or just treating each node as a logical block. And sometimes that makes perfect sense for that logical block to be a JavaScript function node that has a lot of logic in that you could do in a flow, but it just makes sense to compartmentalize it. And I say it's one of those things I think you gain with experience of using Node-RED, of how fine-grained to create your flows, and at what level does it make sense to resort to the function node.
Yeah, I come from the opposite opinion. For me, it's the node of first resort. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the personal preference, when that really decides which way you want to go. I think with a small application, definitely the visual and using the timers and things, I think would make sense. But on a larger one, I think that's where it becomes a little more difficult. I use a lot of the node status. I think that's a really cool visual cue of what's happening with your program, and you have full control over what you wanted to present there. So I'll show you an example how I make use of that. And then there is that timer node, but as we talked about, trying to do this in structure in the JavaScript functions. This is just a real easy way that I found to do timers within using global context and referencing the date.now to trigger events. That's a real, timer on is like a real common building block of a PLC program. So
Awesome.
Yeah. So a quick overview of the application. This is a logistics application where think of a warehousing application where you have boxes that are being shipped from a distribution center to stores, and those boxes are going to have different things in the boxes, and so the idea is you would verify that what you're shipping to the stores is correct, because if you ship the wrong things to the stores, that creates problems, obviously. So every box has a barcode, and then every item that's in the box has an RFID tag on it. So there's a series of conveyors, and the boxes are just manually loaded one after another. And what the system needs to do is scan that barcode and then query a database which has all the order information, and needs to return what should be in that box, and needs to return that before the box gets to conveyor number 3, which is when an inventory of what's in the box is returned. And then the system needs to compare those two. And by the time it gets to conveyor number 4, it needs to give an indication whether it's a pass or fail. If it's a fail, that box needs to be pulled aside, and someone needs to dig through the box and figure out what's wrong with it. So then there's some manual buttons, to start and stop the system. So we used a Wago Edge computer with a touch screen, a very large industrial grade touch monitor. And we're using the 750 series I/O with a Modbus coupler to do things like turning the conveyors on and off. There's sensors at the end of every conveyor for to sense the box so that it knows to stop the box. Yeah, and then there's some third-party devices, the barcode scanners, the RFIDs. Those are not Wago components, but we integrate those into the I/O system. Yeah, so this was installed at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. I think it's 10 systems that went in, and they've been running full production, exceeded the throughput requirements, and was a successful project.
Awesome. So I know you're going to sort of show us a bit of behind the scenes of some of the Node-RED in action on how you built this, but from perhaps before we go there, what would your reflection be on the complexity perhaps of building this in CodeAssist versus Node-RED, or what benefits you found by, other than wanting to prove you could
Yeah,
do it all in Node-RED?
Yeah, I think the proving was certainly one of the main motivations, but there were some technical reasons why it made sense to do this apart from that curiosity. The engineer that was initially working on this really struggled with the database component. The CodeAssist and Wago's done a great job developing database libraries, so we can talk to SQL databases and MySQL or Microsoft SQL, those kind of things. This was another type of database that really wasn't supported, and it was a cloud-based database. So, of course, Node-RED can talk to just about any database on the planet. So it just made sense to use Node-RED in this case, and we certainly could have done the conveyor controls with the CodeAssist runtime, and then done everything else apart from that. There were some issues also with the barcode scanner. They were UDP. Sorry, they were TCP, native TCP, socket connection type interface, and we did get that to work, but it really took like several hours to get it to work. With Node-RED, it was really as simple as dropping the TCP node, putting the IP address, and you're instantly getting the data out of it. So just it's just really night and day how quick that development happens in Node-RED versus the runtime.
And I mean that reflects heavily on a lot of the early motivations for spending our time creating Node-RED back in the day was that uh, often doing projects where you'd be presented with some very random devices talking quite random protocols, random ways to connect, and just that was the motivation of just having the versatility in Node-RED of um, having those basic building blocks of, well, if it's going to be sending TCP, then let's just have a TCP building block. Let's have a serial node building block. Let's have,
Mhm.
just because, yeah, doing projects where you don't know what bit of hardware you're going to be presented with next. And so just wanting to have the toolkit available to very quickly and easily get it connected and sharing its data. Because
Mhm.
there's not much value you spending hours getting that barcode connected to the system. Um, it's a necessity, but yeah, there's not, you need that to work. And you spending hours of your time getting that working, okay, that's part of delivering the solution, but you'd much rather be spending it actually on the business logic and the actual business value through the system. So
Yeah, exactly. And from an integration standpoint, the time equals money. The more time you have to spend on something, um, the more
yeah,
it's costing you at the end of the day, or your customer. So that rapid development and just dropping a node in and knowing that that node is fully tested and in production elsewhere is a
yeah,
lot. It's a big peace of mind versus having to kind of write from scratch your own interface. So
for sure.
and then the other part of this too, these systems were several states away,
Mhm.
and with Node-RED, and this was before FlowFuse, so this was a non just standard Node-RED instance, but um, having just a web server, doing everything through a web server, so we can jump on a Teams call. The engineer, there at site can just share his screen, put a browser connected to the machine, and we can instantly start deploying code.
Mm.
With Code Assist, you have to install Code Assist. You have to make sure the targets match. You have to make sure all the libraries are the right versions, and so there's a little more setup that needs to happen in the field, which is just another friction point. So
Yeah,
um, this
uh,
was really easy to just jump on and make some changes and debug. And if they have a problem, in 5 minutes we can be in and out and the
absolutely.
systems back up.
Yeah.
So
And I should also say, yeah, this is not to take anything away from Code Assist because as ever, it's going to be use the right tool for the right job. And yeah,
yeah,
there are strengths and weaknesses to any of these considerations. But great. Yeah, I think this is a great example where Node-RED has sort of shone through for all the right reasons.
yeah. Yeah, not to detract from Code Assist at all. We do majority of our projects still today with Code Assist
Yeah,
because of the real time nature of it and
absolutely. Yeah,
those kind of things. So
yeah. And I did notice one of the questions that had come in was around the relative real time nature of
mhm.
Node-RED versus Code Assist, and I think and I think that is an important distinguisher between the two. That Node-RED's not trying to be that real-time control system, but when
Yeah, for sure.
where you can use it in conjunction with the real-time control system, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and this type of project is really conducive to a non-real time system. There's a sequence of events that's happening, but if they happen within 50 to 100 milliseconds, um, that window is perfectly fine when you're moving boxes down a conveyor. But
Yeah,
um, if we were controlling steppers or that obviously would not be the right choice. So
yeah,
that's you have to kind of evaluate the project before you decide whether this is a good idea or not. So
for sure.
yeah.
Okay, so with that, shall I pass you control of the screen share and let you
Yeah,
show
great.
some of what you've got?
All right. Did that come up, Nick?
Yeah, we've got that.
Okay, perfect. So I have one device that's running the node, so I'm just going to connect to that device. Actually, I've already got it pulled up here. So yeah, here we have it. So we have a number of flows, and like I said, we try to organize these functions to kind of simulate what a PLC runtime would do. So here we have our input and outputs mapped. So we're doing a Modbus read and a Modbus write, and we're utilizing these global contexts. So this section here creates the global context, and essentially it just kind of creates the initial values for them. And then if you go into, you see them all here. I think I have to refresh this. I think my FlowFuse connection timed out while we were talking a minute ago.
So just for context on the FlowFuse aspect, and we'll cover a bit more of that after your demo. So this is running on a device you have locally using the FlowFuse agent, and then that device is connected to the FlowFuse platform. And here you're accessing the Node-RED editor through the FlowFuse platform, remotely editing the flows on your device. Just to
That's right.
Give that a quick bit of context for the FlowFuse aspect of what we're looking at
here. Yeah, thanks for that. And this device is physically next to me, but it doesn't have to be. It could be the actual machine. Several time zones away from me, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I just have all these objects. This is a conveyor control, so you have things like the conveyor object that might have the sensors, whether the sensor is true or false, latches to control state machine, things like that. Yeah, so then basically I'm just mapping the different inputs to make sure that the state of the sensors is updating those objects. And then to control the outputs, I'm just moving the conveyor run signals to the output modules that are wired to those states. And then we have some lights to indicate at the end of the conveyor whether the box is a good or bad box. And then this is the main conveyor control. So you can see here, C1 is conveyor 1, conveyor 2, and then as it's running, it'll tell you if that what state that each conveyor is. So if you look at the code, it's just a giant case statement, and so you can see boxes entering the conveyor, boxes at the end of the conveyor, place the box on the conveyor, and you can kind of just walk through what those states are. Pretty basic controls stuff, but there's also a manual mode, which is useful if you want to just turn a conveyor on. If you're having trouble with a motor or something, you can manually turn things on if you need to.
And I think already a good example there, we're seeing the little statuses below the function nodes. Yeah, great example where you can well put quite bespoke information status in there that's helpful whilst you're debugging your flows.
Yeah, and I think controls engineers are really used to having that online mode where when they're debugging their code, they can see the variable values all presented, right in their logic. In Node-RED, especially when you're using the functions, it doesn't have a live view, so you kind of have to either use the status, the node status, or refresh the global list and then drill down to where the information is that you're looking for. So that part's pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little trickier is when you start integrating other components. So this is, like I said, just the conveyor control, but so now you have to know when to trigger the RFID. You have to know when to trigger the barcode scanner. And so visually, I just organized, and most of these are actually just showing indicator, showing node status, so you can kind of visually see the box moving through the system.
Mhm.
And then there's R triggers. I do use this Boolean was a Boolean logic palette, which gives you kind of PLC type nodes, which are convenient. So it's like a rising edge trigger or one shot type of thing, and that'll trigger, when the conveyor when the box gets to where it needs to query the barcode scanner, then it sends that one message over to the scanner tab, and then this will scan the barcode and return the results. So this is probably the most complex flow, and I found this was the easiest way to kind of organize it. Yeah, these are the two scanners, and then there's a database flow as well, where if you remember that once the barcode is read, then you need to query that barcode to find out what should be in that box, and that's really what this does. Is it uses a Linux command to connect to the database,
Mhm.
and then it returns. It's an exe command basically that's running at the shell, and then it's returning a big XML file, and then just parsing the XML back to JSON. And then once it's in JSON, Bob's your uncle. You can pretty much do anything you need to with it.
Yeah, and you alluded to some of the challenges for this solution with the particular database system you were using, and again, good example of the flexibility Node-RED has of yeah, even resorting to shelling out commands on the command line and getting it back the output. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a Swiss Army knife. I mean, every time we kind of ran into a roadblock, there was like so many different ways to bypass, and solve those problems that came up. One of the things that came up was their database was slow occasionally, and so that affected the throughput of the machine. So we just dropped a ping node, and we returned the ping time and put it on the screen. And so, if they're having a network issue, their operators know they need to, kind of either call their IT department or just load boxes a little slower. I mean, the
Mhm.
system will pace itself, but information is really helpful when you're in production. If you're noticing something, it's nice to know why it's doing that, and not just
Yeah,
kind of be in the dark as to what the problem is. So
absolutely. But you can also be, once you go in production and you start realizing there might be issues, again, great flexibility just to add in that sort of monitoring of your database and adding that bit of feedback to your UI without having to, re-engineer the whole solution. You can be very
mhm.
opportunistic with adding in these extra bits that help solve real challenges along the way.
Yeah, yeah, those really make a system um, powerful in the sense that you can kind of add refinements that make it just polished.
Mhm.
That ability to polish, I think is really a great thing about doing everything in Node-RED, because it's really easy to add little features like uh, we were concerned about the CPU utilization, so we just dropped a CPU node, and it returns the kind of HTOP result
Mhm.
back to the screen, and we can display that as well to see the overall health of the system. So you can see, like, right now we're at 14% utilization on this CPU. So yeah, it's pretty flexible.
Mm.
Maybe I'll switch to just to kind of walk you through the dashboard. So not only did we do the controls, but we also did the HMI in Node-RED using dashboard. And that was another kind of curiosity of whether that would be acceptable.
Mhm.
Typically when you're using HMI, you're using kind of a what you see is what you get approach, and you're building all those screens and pages, exactly like you want them to look. With dashboard, it's a little bit more. There is a little bit of control over how things are organized on the screen, but it's more like an app, like iPhone app or something, where you're just kind of dropping things on the screen and then letting the browser decide, how those are presented. But we did the screen in a kiosk mode, so the browser comes up full screen and the resolution is fixed. So once you kind of get it looking the way that you want it to look, it's pretty much going to look that way every time.
Mm-hmm.
So, so this is the main operate screen. Here you can start and stop the conveyors. It gives you, indication of whether you're. This is an e-stop monitoring. It's not controlling the e-stop. We have a safety circuit for that, but this is just helpful for the operator to know that somebody's pushed an e-stop button. There's alarming conditions. There's a nice table. This UI table is just awesome. I mean, you can do so much with it. So I'm using it in several different ways. Here I'm using it to show the status of every conveyor, whether it's running or if it's querying a box or whatever it's doing at that time, which is helpful. And then there's just a lot of status information on how the history of the boxes that have been run. And then this will show you what the current box that's been staged, the barcode and what it's found inside of that box. And then this is the disposition at the end, showing if there's a match or if there's missing or if there's extra pieces in the box. So I can actually simulate this.
Mm-hmm.
I have a simulation node, which is another really great thing about the system is that doing things like simulation is really quick and easy. You just drop in and string it all up and put timers, and you can find it pretty flexible. So this is just basically walking through a box. So you can see it's loading. Now conveyor 2 is loading. And there's timers in here. I have the timers configured.
Yeah.
Be more or less slower than normal.
But I think it's a great example of, again, the flexibility. You can work out what context you want to provide, what information you need to provide. You'd mentioned that this was situated on a very large scale screen, actually co-located with the conveyor belt. So one of the questions in the chat was around whether you had to consider multi-tenancy in the dashboards or users like that. But I think from what you've described, this was a physical installation, and it's kind of, you didn't need to worry about users as such because it's the person stood in front of the screen is the user.
Yeah, there was no requirement for multi-user and having privilege levels and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That if that was a consideration, then I think you would probably want to look at using the code assist visualizations that have user levels and user management as well. So
yeah, I will add, of course, this predates the work that FlowFuse has done on the new dashboard nodes that we've created. But again, a lot of that multi-tenancy, some of the WYSIWYG capabilities are things we're actually working on in the FlowFuse dashboard nodes as well. So again, not necessary for this use case, but yeah, those are things that multi-tenancy is already there with FlowFuse dashboard, and the WYSIWYG editor is coming along very nicely.
Yeah, those will be nice additions. I see this, still somewhat early stages. I think that as more and more adoption of Node-RED happens, and these, maybe this is a fringe use case, but I think there's definitely I think it's something that should be looked into. I think it's something that has a potential, pretty big potential for usage. So
absolutely, no, I would say a lot of our large customers using FlowFuse today are running Node-RED on devices on their factory floors with HMIs attached, using dashboard, whether FlowFuse dashboard or its predecessors or alternatives. But no, it is a really common use case that you can use Node-RED to create those HMIs. And as I say, make them super
Awesome.
flexible, super adaptable, and interactive. It isn't just about putting graphs on the screen. It's putting controls on the screen. It's giving you a way to actually interact with what's going on.
Yeah, and I like the modern look of it. You can spend a lot of time in an HMI environment, kind of designing the look and feel, and I think having that consistent, kind of a predetermined approach there's a lot to be said about that in regards to the time savings there. But yeah, I mean, this has everything you would expect an HMI to have. There's the manual mode that I mentioned. So if you want to just turn a conveyor on, you can do that here. Has status of all the digital inputs coming back from the Wago remote IO if there's any alarms. You can also query the database. So if you just put the barcode here, it'll query the database. So if you imagine, the operator has a bad box and they want to know what should be in that box. This gives them the ability to just query and see what should have been in that box, compare.
That's really
I
good.
think adjustments like timer delays, and depending on how the motor ramp rates are set and things like that, you can do some fine tuning here. You can save and load the configuration of the machine. It's doing something weird graphically. I think it's because my browser is not the right dimensions. If you have this at the right resolution, it'll present correctly. Gives you a nice log of everything that's been run, and it's helpful to maybe look back at the end of the shift and see what actually took place. Yeah, so that's a kind of a 10,000-foot view of the screens. So
that's brilliant. But again, I think it's a great example of you start with we need an HMI that shows the live state of the system. Well, now I've got that. Let's add a view that lets us fine tune the parameters. Let's add a view that gives us you solve one problem, and then you suddenly realize actually we can start solving other problems, and we can just quickly expand and add more value really easily with the tools.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me, conscious of time, let's switch back to, if I click the right button. There we are.
Yes, I think we touched on a lot of these, but some of the conclusions that I think we made was that the Node-RED is proven. It's been reliable. It's been running for several years in this application, and we have other applications where we've used Node-RED as a kind of a quasi runtime.
Yeah.
It's suitable, but you really need to make sure that it fits the application, like we talked about, making sure that it doesn't have real-time requirements and things like that. The dashboard makes a great HMI. I think the look and feel is perfectly acceptable in industrial environments, and haven't had any complaints about that from customers. Putting a Wago industrial PC in full screen mode with the kiosk mode is really a great approach that kind of hides the Linux environment from the operator, so they can't start playing games and stuff on it. So it kind of locks them out of doing stuff like that. And just having it all in one was a huge time saver. Being able to develop your Node-RED logic, all of the logic, and as well as the dashboard and the visualizations all in one flow. It's so easy to just import, export. With the FlowFuse system, it's as easy as just deploying the project to as many devices as you need, and managing the projects in a central way, I think be a huge plus. The web-based nature of Node-RED, when you're talking about remote support, is a huge plus, and not having to rely on installing proprietary IDEs. Everything can be done just through pretty much any browser. This one is maybe my own opinion, but I think that the development time is greatly reduced compared to your typical PLC environment, simply because you make a small change and you hit deploy, and depending on the speed of your device, it's really just a few seconds before you're up and running. Where with a compiled project, especially large compiled projects, every small change can take upwards of 30 seconds to a minute. to download those changes to the controller. And if you add that up over the course of several days, I think it just slows things down, kind of slows the pace of development down. And the ability to just kind of drop nodes in, like we talked about for the scanners, that just greatly sped up the development time.
Yeah.
And one that's not mentioned here, but the cross-platform nature of Node-RED, and how you literally can take flows that were designed and built on, let's say, an ARM device and upload them to an x86 or even like a Mac, and pretty much anything, as long as it's actually running Node-RED. I don't know of any really incompatibilities between those different platforms. That's very unique for a control environment.
Yeah, and that speaks a lot to the underlying Node.js runtime environment. It's a great sort of leveler. Takes care of a lot of those challenges for sure.
Yeah. One, I guess, issue I think to be aware of is, Node-RED is not new, but it's definitely not widely known, as widely known as some of the PLC environments that are out there. So, if you're trying to find expertise in your factory, you may have to do some training to get them up to speed on Node-RED. They may not be familiar with it. But as I said earlier, when I first started talking about Node-RED, 8 years ago, it's completely different now. I mean, pretty much everyone knows about Node-RED, or they probably tried Node-RED at least one time. So I think as time goes on, that problem will become less and less, and having expertise like FlowFuse and your team, I think is really helpful, especially if you're new to Node-RED and you maybe have some concerns about support. Having someone that's just a phone call away to help you walk you through things, I think is a huge benefit.
Absolutely.
And
yeah,
and Wago, as we have a pretty large team of applications engineers that have experience with Node-RED as well. So the hardware manufacturer can also give that level of support as well.
For sure. And from our perspective with FlowFuse, we've got people in the company who are long-term members of the Node-RED community, myself included, clearly. And as a company, we can be there to provide support, professional services around Node-RED in the context of FlowFuse. But yeah, it's again great to see how just the community is maturing around Node-RED, and there are, as you say, there are lots of people out there using it, and the community side of Node-RED is one of the many aspects I'm super proud of what we've created, and just how constructive and supportive the community are around the questions in the forum or wherever they may be. It's there's no shortage of help out there, but for those looking for professional services around it, again, that is something FlowFuse is in a position to offer, and as you say, device manufacturers have growing expertise as well with regard to their own devices.
Yeah,
So,
this is a shameless plug. I have a YouTube channel. Like I said, I've been doing this for many years, and done a lot of content on Node-RED. One that might be of interest if you're interested in this topic is I did an example of using multiple Node-RED instances to provide redundancy from the control. So if you unplug these Raspberry Pis, as in this example, they could be any Node-RED instances. The control will then fall over to the next one. So I chose 4, but that code is all up on the Node-RED the NPM site for Node-RED, and you can just search for the links are in the video description. But yeah, I mean, you could scale that up to as many as you need, essentially. So and then I've done a number on FlowFuse recently, showing how you can run the FlowFuse agent on the CC100 as well as integrating our remote I/O with any FlowFuse device.
Yeah, and I think that does answer one of the questions we had, was whether Wago controllers are capable of running the FlowFuse device agent natively. But suddenly, using the Docker layer, you can run the agent on the device, and that gives you the control and the access as you would as if you were running Node-RED directly on that device. So yeah, you do gain the ability then for all these features that you saw briefly with remote access and remote management of those devices. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So if you're interested in finding out more, yeah, please do check out some of these videos. They go back 8 years, which is awesome to see. These couple recent ones on the FlowFuse side just shows how quick and easy it is to get the device agent running on these devices and connect it to the platform and start running. So that's awesome to see. So conscious of time, I want to make sure we have time to run through some of the questions that have been coming through. So I'll just stick this slide up if I remember what button to click. So for those who are less familiar with what FlowFuse is about, so we think about how companies adopt Node-RED at scale is kind of the main tenet of what I think about. So we like to think about it with this circle diagram. We've got Node-RED at the core, which has all the strengths of Node-RED. We've been talking a lot about those, its ability to connect, collect, transform, visualize, interact, all those qualities of Node-RED. And then what FlowFuse brings to the party is thinking about, okay, now if I want to have a dozen Node-RED instances across lots of devices, or I need to have a team of developers collaborating, or I need to make sure only certain users can make changes to certain parts of my flows, all those sorts of qualities. That's what the FlowFuse platform brings to how you can manage Node-RED at scale. So some of the examples, for example, with the conveyor belt story, the project that Kurt talked about, to do that today in FlowFuse, where you wanted to roll that out to multiple locations, you wouldn't necessarily want to, if you found a bug in the flows or an improvement to making the flows, you wouldn't want to have to go and then manually apply that change to all of your devices separately. With FlowFuse, we have DevOps pipelines for Node-RED, so you'd actually be able to develop your flows in one environment. Once you're happy, you can do a one-click deploy that would then push those changes out across a group of devices. So makes it much easier to manage and scale your development efforts around Node-RED. And there's a lot of other stuff that FlowFuse offers above and beyond that core Node-RED experience. But yeah, if you're interested in finding out more, do check out some of our previous webinars where we've done a bit more of a deep dive across the pillars of what FlowFuse offers. But also, reach out to myself or any of the team if you're interested in finding out more. With that bit said, I'm going to go pull up some of the Q&As, and we've had a decent number come through. We've only got a few minutes, so I'm going to scan through this list, and I may have to be a little selective which ones we pull out. So just scanning down this list. So a question from Trent Christopher for you, Kurt, possibly. Does Node-RED integrate with special I/O as well as just digital I/O on the rack? And what about remote I/O? He assumes this would have to be handled in code assist. Is that one you can speak to?
The remote I/O, we would use Modbus remote I/O. So like a 750-362 coupler. If you have specialty modules, there are some specialty modules that you can integrate using Modbus. It really depends on the module, but if it's a module that requires one of the libraries, then that's where you would want to use the runtime in conjunction with Node-RED, and then use network variables or use MQTT or something to transfer data back and forth. Yeah.
And it's true to say Wago have developed some of your own nodes for interaction with your hardware, haven't they?
Yeah, we have one for the power measurement module. That's a real common one. It has you basically just drop that node in and point it to the module, um, the index for that module in the rack, and it will, provide the voltage current readings for you.
Nice. Scanning through. So a question is Node-RED stable enough for industrial environments? I think uh, we would obviously say absolutely. We
Yeah.
I think both of us see it used very successfully. So for context, one of our customers has over 1,000 Node-REDs running across their facilities, all being managed by FlowFuse. And very happily doing a wide variety of roles across their factory floors, from HMIs, data collection, and a whole range of things in between. But
And
yeah,
and I found it to be very fault tolerant. That there are some things that you can do to lock it up. If you put a infinite loop in a function, that's going to instantly cause problems for you. But if you're not doing things like that, once the code's running, it's pretty stable. And if there's alarms or errors, it doesn't really affect the overall
mhm.
performance of the system. So yeah, this
Yeah,
this machine here that we talked about, like I said, has been running for a number of years and um, hasn't had any problems with. There was one instance where we had to kind of redeploy the flows. I don't know if something got corrupt in the installation, but that was a very one-off thing. And I mean, that can happen with any controller. Um, but yeah, I think you anyway want to make sure you select applications that don't require determinism. And if the conveyor doesn't turn on, it's not the end of the world. At the end
yeah.
of the day. So um, that's definitely needs to be factored in.
So scanning down through this list, there's still a ton more questions, but I'm conscious of time. So there's a few questions about well, interested in finding out more about Wago and FlowFuse can offer in terms of services. I would suggest, if those things you're interested in, please do reach out to Kurt or myself from the respective sides. Happy to have that conversation offline. Um, an interesting question. I just wanted to pick up a question from Robert Potter about, do I think that FlowFuse will dilute the effort that's going into the development of Node-RED? Um, I I will say the plan is actually quite the reverse. From my perspective, now that I am now in a position to dedicate my time to the Node-RED ecosystem, and I mean I do acknowledge that that's more than just the core of Node-RED, but um, you know, FlowFuse as a company is built around the success of Node-RED, and clearly it's in our interest to keep Node-RED moving forward and investing in it. So when you look at the work we've done with the FlowFuse dashboard to give the dashboard a future, yeah, it is carrying on. But Node-RED is an open source project, so it isn't purely being developed by myself and others in from FlowFuse. It's there for the community to be involved, and I encourage people to get involved if they have interest and want to have provide feedback, have a say, get involved with the development of Node-RED itself. Um, Michael Saltis has made a comment about he's found tools like ChatGPT do a good job of creating sample code and helping learning code for PLC programmers. Absolutely. AI assistants are a big thing. I will point you to, in FlowFuse, we have the FlowFuse assistant that is an integrated AI assistant for helping you write function node code, as well as other capabilities. But yeah, that it's a super interesting area. Um, Scanning through the list, I probably far more that we can dive into right now. A question from Robert Potter, one more. Could we provide an industrial certification kite mark type affair for nodes in the Node-RED library? This is something, again, we're doing in the context of FlowFuse. We provide a certified nodes catalog, which is a set of nodes from the public catalog that we put through some additional checks and keep refreshed, so you can have some confidence around them. But that's something we're looking to grow and expand. And Yeah, we're a couple minutes over. There are lots of quite specific technical questions which I wouldn't be able to do justice in without running on for another half hour. So, in the interest of all of your time, I just want to say thank you so much, Kurt. That was fascinating. Yeah, like I said at the start, really great to see real examples of where Node-RED's been successful. So, I just big thank you to you for sharing your time and sharing your stories with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Nick, for the opportunity to talk about something I'm really passionate about. And it's it's amazing to see what Node-RED and the community has, accomplished in such a short amount of time and has really a really, really bright future. So thanks again for the
Awesome.
opportunity. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Had a great time.
So, and to everyone who's joined, if you're interested in finding out more about FlowFuse, of course, I need to tell you about, you can sign up to our FlowFuse Cloud, get a free trial for 2 weeks to evaluate the platform. You can also book a demo with us, get in touch. And yeah, if you have questions on the Node-RED FlowFuse side of things that are burning away and haven't been answered, then please do reach out to myself or anyone from the team, and we'll be more than happy to help. So with that, I think I'll do Hasman's bit by saying thank you all for joining.